Hey, who here remembers the good old days of gaming as a kid? You hooked up your console via your RF connector, played your games, enjoyed the heck out of them. That was how to live, right? Wrong. Yeah, something most people involved in the hobby of retro gaming come to hear or read at some point is that there are much better options available for hooking up their consoles than what they may already be using, or that how you have your game set up to play is somehow not optimized, whether it be the cables you're using, the type of TV you're using, or yikes, stretching games to widescreen. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody share a picture of them playing a game only to get destroyed in the comments for playing their older games in widescreen, when all they were trying to do was share a post about how much fun they're having playing a game. That's like when people tell me I'm opening my bananas from the wrong end. From either end I hear this criticism, so you know what? To heck with all of ya. If you prefer playing on original hardware, one of the main factors when hooking up your older consoles is which cable you use. And here I have a basic hierarchy going from worst to best, left to right. I actually made a video that goes through all of these that people have told me is a great basic overview. I'll have a link to it in the description if you're interested. Now, for some people, when it comes to how you hook up your consoles, it doesn't take much to spark your curiosity and head down the rabbit hole that is fully optimizing your gaming setup. But instead of finding carrots in this rabbit hole, you may just find something else. One day you're perfectly happy playing your games via composite, aka good old red, white, and yellow. Then somebody mentions a word like RGB or SCART. And the next thing you know, you're calling up hospitals to ask if they have any old PVM monitors tucked away in storage somewhere. A top priority for them to help you out with, I'm sure. Finding out just how discerning a person can be when it comes to how you hook up your game consoles can be a rude awakening for some, to the point that you may wish you had never known and just stayed blind to this information. Like eating hot dogs. After all, you know what improving your gaming setup often requires, don't you? That's right, money and time. Two things just about nobody wants to give up more of. The potential upgrades you make aren't always as simple as buying a new cable either. Sometimes different hardware revisions result in different video quality as well. You may watch a video about how to optimize your setup for a particular console, only to come away from it feeling like your entire setup is trash. And hey, maybe even that you yourself as a retro gamer are trash too. A nice little bonus. Yep, time to bust out the checkbook, as if buying original games isn't expensive enough. Buying all the doodads and diddly bobs to optimize it all can rack up the cost even more. And while you're at it, you might just buy yourself the most expensive thing of all, a one-way ticket to madness. This can be a big part of the reason why some people just go with the alternative methods, such as the tried and true, use whatever you have method, as well as the options outside of playing on old original hardware, something getting more and more popular by the day with various ways to do it and a lot of great options. I've always said that a big part of the reason why many consoles became so popular is how simple they are. You just plug it in and that's it, just like the good old days. No worrying about different cables, different converter boxes, or any of that. Trying to optimize your setup isn't always some scary thing though. I'm alluding to some of the more extreme examples to make my point, but it could be as simple as somebody having a realization that, hey, turns out I can buy an S-video cable for $15 online that made my console look nicer, and I've been enjoying it. That may be good enough for somebody, and that is going to be a theme for this video. Having a gaming setup that is good enough for you personally. Now, some people may watch this video hoping for me to tell them which video connection would mean that they have a good setup. But that's impossible to do because who am I to tell somebody they have a bad setup if they're having a lot of fun with it? Personally, I use SCART cables, generally considered somewhat of a gold standard, even if you do want to upconvert your signal to HD for an HD TV. So if you really want an answer, then there you go, SCART. Although, if you're in the US, you'll probably need to convert that signal, perhaps to component, using a SCART to component component converter box, this is the one I have, trying to get my actual one from where it's hooked up to show you didn't go so well. I would also say that you get a nice jump in quality from composite to S-video. But at the same time, I play my NES via composite video because I didn't want to hassle with modding my console. And here's a quick little test for you. Which video cable am I using to play Gunstar Heroes right here? It's composite. See, you can't even tell the difference. Like I said, do what feels good enough to you. You don't want to get to a point where you feel like you're obsessing over it in a negative way. Because here's the thing, it's almost impossible to run out of little improvements that you could potentially make, no matter how small they might be. I remember one day I was extensively researching and experimenting with what the ideal viewing angle and distance from my TV was until I thought, what the heck am I doing? As kids, we'd lay on the floor craning our necks up to see the screen, and we could have given a darn. I mean, yeah, you gotta take care of your adult body, yada yada yada, and if researching ideal viewing angles is enjoyable, then go for it. But that's the key. Make sure this kind of stuff is enjoyable for you. And hey, in theory, once you got your game set up, you should be good to go. Set it and forget it. That is, until you decide to add one more cable or console, and it can be a son of a barnacle to get back behind the TV for some of us. Okay, so how do you determine how much hassle is worth it to upgrade your setup? Well, I came up with an equation that I find to be helpful. Enjoyment gained minus overall hassle equals how worth it is. Basically, you want to make sure that your overall enjoyment is outweighing the overall hassle of upgrading it, which is obviously going to vary from person to person and depending on your setup. If it feels like zero hassle to you, then hey, you're in really good shape. But if you're perfectly happy being a composite cowboy or composite cowgirl, you gotta ride that horse, baby. Don't let anyone tell you you're doing it wrong. And since we're talking about composite, there actually are reasons people prefer to use composite. You know, outside of just how accessible it is. You see, composite video allows for dithering, a technique that would take advantage of some of the inherent blur that came with both RF and composite to manipulate the coloring and shading. Some developers would even design parts of their games around this, making this the intended way to play in some people's eyes. The waterfalls in Sonic are probably the most talked about example of this. Okay, but let's take a minute to talk about the people who make the videos that really deep dive into just how far you can go to optimize your setup. I'll sometimes see these people getting criticized for making people feel like their setup sucks. To which I'd say, don't shoot the messenger. They're just providing information. They're not there to judge. I mean, I suppose they could do it in a judgmental way, but when I think of a channel like My Life in Gaming, those folks don't seem judgmental at all from what I've seen. Just people who have a ton of passion for gaming, and I'd go on to say that a channel like that goes beyond entertainment, serving as a valuable resource of information for the retro gaming community to have access to. Those videos are a lot of work, more than people probably even realize. Also, am I the only one who's brought to tears by that channel's emotional intro song? Okay, but now I want to move on to another aspect of anybody's gaming setup that I don't know if I would say is underrated, but its importance cannot be emphasized enough, and that would be the controllers you're using. Naturally, which controller people prefer will vary. Usually first-party controllers will do the job, but if you feel like you're settling or compromising by using a certain controller, you owe it to yourself to invest in being able to use a better one. And I'd even say the investment is worth it for each console you'd like a better one for. That will make your setup feel nicer for you. And while we're talking about controllers, you know what would really make your gaming setup a lot better? Friends! You know, people to hold all those controllers as they play multiplayer with you. Some games really shine when played with more than one person, and having an armada of friends to play them with you isn't always the most readily available thing. I've still never played 10-player Bomberman. Well, maybe one day it'll happen, add it to the list. But while you can't control the availability of your friends to play games with you, you can control the availability of your consoles. That is, having them ready to play. Having to hook up a console every time you want to play is not ideal, although people certainly do it. But at the very least, I would say to try to have the consoles you play the most always hooked up and ready to go. That should make you feel like you've got a good setup. If you're interested, I also did a video about hooking up multiple consoles that I'll have a link to in the description. Hooking up multiple consoles can certainly be a challenge, and again, this is why some people prefer to use other methods instead, making things a lot simpler, at least in certain ways. But regardless of how simple or complicated your setup is, you definitely want to have it be clean. No, not that kind of clean, although a little dusting never hurts. What I mean is that you should have a place for everything, so you don't just have stuff scattered around or piled up. And your cables, those pesky cables, you'll want to have a plan for them. Generally, you can keep them behind your furniture and out of sight, but there are instances where they're exposed, and I always like to recommend cable wraps for this. If you just search online for cable wraps, you'll get a million different options. You can pack a lot of cables in these things, and hey, you can even stow away some goodies in there too. I think for most of you, your intuition will tell you what kind of setup you want. You evaluate what's important to you and come up with a setup that is tailored to your needs, not somebody else's. Well, except for maybe your sweetie pie. But while somebody may want their game room filled with 100 plush Yoshis, that may not be for you. If your setup has felt crappy, then it's probably worth it to make some improvements. But if you've been happy with it, then you're probably good to go, with maybe some minor tweaks you could make here or there. For this video's question, if you don't mind helping me with a little bit of research, I'd be curious which aspect of your gaming setup is most important to you. Picture quality, input lag, having all your consoles hooked up at once, maybe it's sound? Heck, for as much as people love video game music, you sure don't hear people talking about their sound setups very much. But I'd love to read your answers. So with that, leave your response down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retrobird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's the retrobird, oh yes, and he hopes that you liked what he had to say.